You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello and welcome to WCAT TV and radio. I'm Kiki Latimer and I'm your host for the Catholic Bookworm. And we have with us here today Professor Rick Spinello, who's written a wonderful book called Four Catholic Philosophers, Rejoicing in the Truth. And those four Catholic philosophers are Jacques Maritain, Edith Stein, Dietrich von Hildebrand, and Karol Wojtyla, or as many of us know him, Pope John Paul II. So it's a very interesting group, a delightful book. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
How about you start us off with a prayer?
Okay, what I'm going to do with the prayer is, in the back of my book, two novenas to the two saints. One is St. John Paul II, and the other is St. Edith Stein. So I'm going to read, it's very short, the novena prayer to St. John Paul II. St. John Paul II, you came to Rome as the man from a far country to serve God as the leader of his church. You became a father to many, but always a father conquered by love. You lived in the truth and preached a message of hope. Your trials showed us how to suffer with patience and dignity. Help us to emulate your example of discipleship and fidelity. Help us to trust that God's mercy will exceed our weakness, especially at the time of our death. Help us to trust in the intercession of Mary, the mother of our hope, so that your words become our own, totus tuus ego sum. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Spirit, amen.
So this is an exciting group. I personally was not, until I read the book, that familiar with Jacques Maritain. I certainly knew his name, but the other three I'm quite familiar with. I had the pleasure of studying under Dr. Stephen Schwartz at the University of Rhode Island, who is the godson of Dietrich von Hildebrand. Right. Quite a bit of Dietrich's philosophy filtered down through Steve to me, for which I was very blessed. Also a convert, and I converted, both my husband and I converted under the papacy of John Paul II. And so he was also very instrumental in our conversion.
Right.
And I'm closely connected to Edith Stein because she was actually friends with Stephen Schwartz's parents and held him as a baby. So I always tell him he's a fourth level relic.
Right, that's right.
Been held by Edith.
Yeah.
So it's very sweet. So I have this personal connection, which has been a great joy in my life.
Yeah, what a great privilege to have been held in the arms of Edith Stein. I'm sure a lot of that, knowing Stephen Schwartz, knowing his work, a lot of that sanctity and great intelligence of Edith Stein perhaps rubbed off on him. Yeah, he was the son of Baldwin Schwartz, right? A very good friend of von Hildebrand's, right? Yeah.
Yes, he's a very, very dear friend now since I met him. I was a student of his in 1980, and then we became, I worked with him as his assistant at URI. And now we've been co-authors together, and we're great friends. I see he and his wife weekly.
Right.
And and as you know, when he saw the cover to your book, he was very excited to see the cover. But I guess Sebastian had switched one of the photographs to make it look good.
Right.
And Steve noticed that right away. He said, Dietrich didn't part his hair on that side.
Correct, yeah. So we had to make a little bit of an adjustment right before it went into print, yeah. Right. Exactly.
So that was funny. He caught that immediately. He's 91 now, but he's quite sharp. So tell us, it's a wonderful book because, this combining of the biographies of these three great Catholic thinkers with huge amounts of their philosophy, the main ideas of their thinking. You've combined these two aspects beautifully. How did you choose these four?
Well, I chose these four because, number one, I thought that their lives were the most interesting. So first of all, if you look back at the 20th century, it was a time of great intellectual vitality, I think, in the church. You look at the theologians that the church produced at the time, Karl Rahner, Bernard Lonergan, and Yves Congar, and of course Joseph Ratzinger became Pope Benedict XVI. Honoré de Lubac, Erzwan Balthasar, just extraordinary group of people. And we find the same in philosophy. If you look back at the philosophy of the 20th century, there's Elizabeth Anscombe, another great woman philosopher with Britain, and Gabriel Marcel, and Etienne Gilson, and the four people that I pick, and a few others. I could have probably my first inclination was to try to write about all of them, but I said, well, this is a little bit too much. So I chose four because they were the four that I think are most representative of 20th century Catholic philosophy. You find a dedication to Thomism for the most part, but you also find a pluralism. They're not afraid to depart from Thomism and to sort of explore other areas and other methods of philosophy like phenomenology. So we don't find philosophy in the Catholic philosophy in the 20th century is not some kind of monolithic entity where everybody's sort of expounding on the philosophy of Thomism. It does go off in some interesting directions, though never in a way that goes against Thomism or goes against the truths of Thomistic philosophy. That kind of, for the most part, that kind of gives them a foundation and a kind of security for them to kind of explore other areas. So I thought that these four kind of reflected the pluralism of 20th century Catholic philosophy. I thought that their lives were quite interesting. They were of all the lives that I looked at, they were the most dramatic. So they're really inspirations for us today. And there's a lot of material on them, so we don't have a great deal of material, for example, on the life of Elizabeth Anscombe. But we have quite a bit of material, first-hand material on these four people, because they have diaries and journals and things that you can read. It really gives you a window into their lives and into their into the way they thought about issues in philosophy. So that's why I picked these four.
Reading them, their lives seem to interflow beautifully with their philosophy. Was that difficult to achieve, or did that just sort of happen organically?
No, it was difficult to achieve. It was a difficult book to write because their philosophies are pretty difficult. I should say that I don't want to scare people away, and you could read this book and just focus on the biography. I tried to sort of isolate the philosophy so that people who don't want to deal with it or feel uncomfortable reading philosophy could just read the biographies, because the biographies in and of themselves, I think, are quite inspiring and quite edifying. But what I do try to do is integrate the two. So I try to show how their lives, how the philosophy kind of emerges out of their out of the experiences of their life. So Edith Stein, for example, early on, she's a phenomenologist, right? She's in the school of Husserl, so this is where she has a sort of connection to von Hildebrand. They're both phenomenologists. But then when she converts, things change for her. She discovers the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas. So her whole philosophical orientation changes now. So now she believes that she sees the limits of phenomenology, that maybe there's things that she can't really achieve there. And she develops what we might call a Thomistically inspired philosophy. I wouldn't call her a Thomist necessarily, but she keeps phenomenology. She continues to use that method. In her last book, the very difficult book, Finite and Eternal Being, it's really a synthesis of Thomistic philosophy and phenomenology. And she does a superb job of that. So her life, her conversion, a very dramatic conversion, leads to a real change in her philosophical orientation that, again, I try to explore in this particular book.
And you mentioned that John Paul II went in the other direction, where he started with Thomism, correct?
Right, that's right. John Paul II, after he was ordained back in 1946, he went off to the Angelicum in Rome to get a doctorate. So he was the Cardinal of Krakow at the time, Cardinal Sapieha, one of the great heroes of the Catholic Church during the Second World War sent him. He realized that this was he called him a student of destiny. He was certainly correct in that assessment. So he sent him to Rome, and he says, you get a doctorate in theology. And he studied there with one of the great Thomists of the time, Père Garrigou-Lagrange, and he becomes a Thomist. I think he had read a lot of Aquinas before that, but certainly seminary life in Poland, such as it was during the war, would have been focused on, intellectually speaking, focused on the works of Aquinas. But he becomes really steeped in Aquinas at the Angelicum. Even though he writes his dissertation on St. John of the Cross, he emerges from Angelicum as a very committed Thomist. He's, in his ethics, he is quite dedicated to natural law and Thomistic anthropology. But then when he goes on to get his second doctorate, so in Europe you need 2 doctorates to teach. So he gets the second one, this time at the Jagiellonian in Krakow, where he, by this time, was working as a parish priest, but he takes some time off to get his second doctorate. Here he discovers phenomenology. I'm sure he probably had discovered it ahead of time, but here he's able to study phenomenology. And so he goes in this direction. He doesn't give up his Thomistic philosophy, which, as I say, was sort of always the foundation for him. It was, he calls it the terrain, the metaphysical terrain. But what he wants to do is sort of explore the nature of the human person in a way that goes beyond that. Because Aquinas doesn't spend a lot of time talking about the human person. Aquinas sort of gives you a metaphysical anthropology. The person is a natural unity of body and soul. But what Wojtyła wants to explore is the lived experience of being a person. What's it like to be in love? What's it like to experience freedom? What's it like to be conscious? What's consciousness mean? All these are kind of issues that he can explore using the method of phenomenology. So he starts from Thomism, doesn't give it up, but moves into phenomenology. Edith Stein starts from phenomenology and moves into Thomism. So it's an interesting parallel, I think, between these two very deep and extraordinarily perceptive thinkers.
And I mean, they are all very interested with that solid grounding of Thomism. They are interested in digging into the lived experience of the human person.
Right.
I think of von Hildebrand with, as you mentioned, the heart. He understood that love wasn't just a feeling, it was an act of the will. But he said, the idea of I will to love you doesn't really sound all that good. You picture a young man saying to a young woman, I will to love you. It's just like all wrong. And so he wrote that beautiful book of his, The Heart, and the importance and of the human heart involved in this willful act of love.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think one of the hallmarks of von Hildebrand is the focus on affectivity and feeling, and it comes through in not only in that book, The Heart, but also in his great book on love, The Nature of Love. What's also interesting is the fact that both von Hildebrand and Karol Wojtyla, John Paul II, write these extraordinary treatises on love. There aren't, you don't find in the history of philosophy a lot of work done on the nature of love. I mean, there's some, but philosophers tend to look at more abstract issues, the nature of being, and anthropology and epistemology, what are the conditions of knowledge. And I don't think they're too interested in love. But we find in the work of these two individuals probably the two greatest treatises on love that have ever been produced. Really, if you take the time to read them. And that's a very important topic for today, because I think people have very superficial understandings of love. We hear these slogans, love is everything, which is, I think, an indication people don't really understand what love is. Love is something, as Wojtyła says, is very complex. It's not something that's simple. And there are different kinds of love. The love of friendship is quite different from the love of marriage. What he calls spousal love, a distinction that also I think von Hildebrand would make. So both of them really spend a lot of time trying to get at the essence of love, which is benevolence and a union of, certainly in the case of marriage, mutual self-donation. Again, these books are not the easiest reading going, but for anyone who really wants to understand what love is, what's the nature of love, these books are two gems. And it's not a lot of scholarly work has been done on them. There's some writings on them, not much, but they're both. If someone's got the willingness or the capacity for doing it, it'd be very interesting to compare the two because they have a lot of parallels, but there are also some significant differences as well. But
I think that you're mentioning, that especially JP2, his writing can be very, very dense and difficult. Dietrich von Hildebrand is much easier to read.
He's clear,
Edith
that's right.
Stein is somewhere in the middle, and Jacques Maritain, like I said, I'm not as familiar with. But I think that mentioning that is important. Some of these works, these amazing works, are difficult to read. And your book fills in a gap of giving us a beautiful introduction to these more difficult philosophies, sort of pared down in bite-sized chunks, so to speak, that the average person, the average layperson, I think, could really appreciate. I don't think you need to be scared off by big words like phenomenology.
Right.
To read your book because it's a beautiful introduction. It both captures us with the biographies, which in all four cases are very interesting biographies, but you've managed to interweave on a much easier way to read them, nice introductions.
Yeah, that was the aim of the book, not just to write about their biographies, which was a great experience to do, but also to sort of introduce people to that thought with the hope that at least some people might pick up some of these books and kind of read them. But it was difficult to do because they are very difficult, particularly as you mentioned, Karol Wojtyla. He's not the clearest writer. I think it's hard to translate his material from Polish into English, and some of the translations we've had to work with are not so good. So what I tried to do is really impose some clarity on these books. And I am grateful, particularly in the case of Wojtyła, that now we do have better translations. People may not be aware, but thanks to the Catholic University Press of America, they're now going to retranslate all of his material into 30 volumes. So we have the first two volumes, The Acting Person. That was the original title in English. Now it's been retranslated as Person and Act. That first translation was very bad, had a lot of inaccuracies in it. But the new one, the one that I use in this book, is much better and much more accurate. We have a new translation of Love and Responsibility. Again, the first one, a lot of problems, but the second one is very accurate. So we have better sources to work with. I think people who perhaps worked with Wojtyła in the past might have had, again, these poor translations. So that certainly helps to have better translations.
There's an old joke, I think that in somewhere in Europe, hardened criminals are given a choice between reading The Acting Person or 10 years in the mines, and no one has ever chosen The Acting Person.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Having read it a number of times and having taught it, which is I teach at the Boston College and St. John's Seminary, so I've taught a whole course on John Paul II where we spent a lot of time on that book. Yeah, it's very difficult. Students have a very hard time with it. As you say, the other thinkers are not so bad. The Dietrich von Hildebrand is very clear. So he is pretty easy to understand. And he's a very fluent writer. And we have, again, new translations of his thought, thanks to the von Hildebrand Project. I want to give them a little bit of a plug because they're working very hard. They retranslated The Nature of Love. So we have new translations of his thought, but he's much clearer. Maritain also is very clear. Edith Stein, the early works I think are not so bad. The book on empathy and the state and the individual and community. The last book, Finite Internal Being, that's very difficult. That's a very hard book to get through. But I think her early books are reasonably clear. The State, for example, is a wonderful book. I didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but I think that's a book sort of waiting to get rediscovered, or discussions on the sovereignty of the state and natural law and so forth. I think any course in political science would benefit greatly from reading her little treatise on the state, and that's extremely clear. Also very clear is her book on woman, Die Frau. That's very easy and very accessible.
She has a lot of very exciting ideas in that, on the concept of the soul, that rather than we're just differentiated by our bodies, but that I have a female soul, you have a male soul. Fascinating concepts that she digs into.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. She does. And again, she does it in a way that's pretty accessible. And those are very interesting ideas, the fact that the difference between man and woman goes deeper than the body, but really affects the soul. One would wish that she, and I think if she lived longer, probably would have explored that idea in a lot more depth, because that marks a departure from Thomism. Thomas would argue that the soul is the same in everybody, and it sort of gets differentiated when it's infused into the body versus a female body. But she claims that the soul is the primary locus of that differentiation. So it would have been interesting if she had been able to sort of develop those ideas. She really did not have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because they're fascinating ideas. Even her
Yeah,
that, that not just that I'm differentiated by a female soul as opposed to a male soul, but that her whole ideas about my connection to my body is different than yours.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. That women are much more deeply connected. And I personally tend to think that that's true, because, I would just see, scientific statistics that, women take better care of themselves, generally speaking, than men do, of our bodies.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the whole maternal, creation of new life is much more, deeply connected to my body than it is to a man. So there's just so much going on there that she, like you said, she just touches on it, and she didn't have the opportunity to continue.
Yeah, I do. As I said, I do think she would have developed those more, because I think she's right. I do think that the woman is much more in touch with her body than a man. So, but the arguments kind of need to be fleshed out, and I think that begins to happen a little bit in Finite Internal Being, but it would need to happen on a lot more. But she would have probably had continued to have a great career she wasn't going to teach anymore. She was in the Carmel, but a great career trying to fuse together phenomenology and Thomism, as she did in Finite Internal Being, explore these issues in a little bit more depth. But of course that didn't happen, because she was put to death at Auschwitz. An interrupted life, which is, and it's our great loss that we don't have more works by her, when she really had, I think, matured as a philosopher, seen the limits of phenomenology and said, okay, I'm not going to abandon it, but I'm going to use that method, but also work with Thomism as my foundation.
So who was your book written for? Who did you have in mind as your reader? I think that's...
Well, I think it is written for the general reader. It's certainly not written for academics and scholars, though they could, I think, profitably read the book. So the book is written for the sort of the average layperson of the Catholic Church who's willing to embark on a little bit of an adventure. As I said, I think we had this great intellectual vitality in the last century. We're not going to see these people again. We don't have thinkers like this now. We don't have Karol Wojtylas and Edith Steins and Maritains. We don't have these people for a lot of reasons that would take us too long to explore. So my book was written for so that people could really appreciate the flourishing of Catholic philosophy in the last century, but also appreciate, again, the lives of these four people. You know, when I started to write it, I was more focused on the philosophy, but then when I began to look at the biographical material, I became more focused on the biographies because they are so dramatic and they are so poignant in their own way. Um, the other thing that I wanted to do in the book, and that I wanted sort of, again, the average Catholic layperson to see, is that there's a big difference between the Catholic philosophers of the last century and secular philosophers. I tried to make that point clear in the book. Uh, we have these secular philosophers who were very supportive of Hitler, for example. We have Heidegger, one of the great figures of the 20th century, who talks about the inner truth and greatness of Nazism, you know, who became rector of the Freiburg University, where Edith Stein spent some time and praised Hitler and fired his mentor, Edmund Husserl. And we have the great Hegel scholar, Alexander Kojev, talking about the universal and homogeneous state of Stalin's Russia. Um, we have Foucault, who was a big supporter of Mao Zedong. Sartre was another supporter of Russia. So all these famous philosophers of the 20th century were, in the words of Mark Lilla, who wrote this book called Reckless Minds, that's what they were, reckless minds, you know. So instead of these reckless minds, we have these great minds, these Catholic minds, uh, who do not go off in these strange directions and end up praising Hitler, praising Stalin, praising Mao, and don't make statements like the Nazism's inner truth and greatness. Um, and the reason is because they are guided by the faith. That's the ultimate reason. They're really guided by the faith. And that it doesn't prevent them from making mistakes here and there. They're not going to be perfect philosophers, but it does prevent them, I think, from these irrational thoughts. I mean, faith really purifies reason and protects it from going off, I think, in these bizarre directions. Protects it from the irrational and these kind of erratic thoughts. So my hope is that people would see all that in looking at this book. Um, and also, I think people can identify with these four thinkers because they're all in search of the absolute in one way or another. You know, that great phrase that Leon Bloy, the friend of the Maritains, kind of used to describe himself, and then Risa Maritain picked up on it, pilgrims of the absolute. Well, that describes the lives of these four people, but it describes our lives as well. We're kind of all pilgrims of the absolute. And I think people can identify with their search for the absolute, their struggles, you know, the doubts and fears that they had that get overcome when they really become people of faith. And, you know, in the Maritain's case, when they convert and really become convinced that Jesus Christ is the Savior and that Jesus Christ is the answer to all these questions. But it's a journey. It doesn't happen easily. You know, I begin that chapter on the Maritains with their walk in the Jardin des Plantes, the beautiful garden in Paris, where they're thinking about committing suicide because they're so depressed, so despondent about the Sorbonne. You know, they study at the Sorbonne, and they're two vibrant intellectuals. They have all these questions about the meaning of life and whether there is an absolute truth and whether there is a God. And they're hoping, I think, when they go to the Sorbonne to get answers, but there are no answers there. You find this rational positivism instead. It's all about science, and the professors don't want to talk about any of these questions. So life is very difficult for them. And then God kind of intervenes in their life with this man, Leon Bloy. They read his book, The Poor Women, and that begins their journey into the Catholic faith. So I think people many people will identify with that because we all kind of struggle with issues of faith and doubt, and we all have moments of despair. So that's the primary reason I wrote the book, is to give people this window into the lives of these four thinkers. They're all saintly in their own way, even though two are canonized as saints. But that they all lived out their lives, I think, with great heroic virtue, and they're all exemplars for us. This would be good Lenten reading, I think, because it's inspiring for Lent, or to read these biographies.
I mean, you mentioned the state of the Sorbonne when Jacques Maritain and his wife were there. It's somewhat the state of most of our universities today, right?
Yeah, it is actually. Yeah, right. It is. I think, unfortunately, it is.
So these four are really a breath of fresh air in this relativism that's being taught.
Exactly. Yeah. Because universities today are dominated by relativism, nihilism, again, this kind of rational positivism, and they're very different. Their thinking is very different. They're willing to kind of explore metaphysical issues. They're very much interested in getting to the bottom of things, to the bottom of what it means to be a human person. They explore the issue of the soul. American universities, American philosophers, for example, not so interested in it. They don't want to talk about the soul because you can't see the soul. We don't know if the soul exists.
Can't measure it.
Yeah, you can't measure it, can't see it, can't hear it. So if it's not empirical knowledge, it can't be real knowledge. But their philosophies aren't confined to the empirical. They're willing to take on these metaphysical issues like the soul and what unifies being, love, exactly. So that's, as you say, I think rightly so. They're a breath of fresh air today. And unfortunately, they're not even at Catholic universities. I don't know how much we teach these four thinkers. They're not around so much. When I studied philosophy, they were kind of big. Maritain was a major figure. This was back in the 70s, but I think he's somewhat forgotten today. So's von Hildebrand, so's Edith Stein. So's for the most part, I think that's what's happening to John Paul too. So they have a lot to say to us. So we need to try to recover their works and recover their teaching and get people to teach them again.
Their ideas are so exciting. They're exciting ideas that, I think sometimes people think of philosophy as kind of boring and, or up in the clouds, like too far up in the clouds, but so much, especially of their writing, is about everyday life and why we are here. And again, like, what is the meaning of it all? That I think especially like all of us are interested in, but I think young people are looking for those answers.
Yeah.
And are looking to explore those questions.
Yeah. As I say, we're all kind of pilgrims of the absolute, particularly young people, who that's the age when people have doubts. So they would probably identify with Jacques and Maritain. You begin to find the answers in their philosophies just by, for example, looking at one of the issues that they all write about, less so von Hildebrand, but certainly the other three, is metaphysical anthropology. Trying to understand the nature of the human person. That's a very important topic for them, and it should be an important topic for everybody. The idea that the human person is a natural unity of body and soul. That the body is an integral part of the person. The sexual differentiated body is an integral part of the person, not some appendage or something exterior to the self that can be manipulated by the self. That whole idea, which I think we've lost today, is something that's very prominent in their writings. And along with that goes the idea that the soul needs the body, the importance of the body. For the sake of knowledge. We're not angels. So the body is not some kind of hindrance, as it was sort of because it was conceived in Platonic thought, but something that's vital for our ability to get knowledge. And we talked about the soul before. Soul is so important because that's the source of immortality for us. The soul is immaterial, intrinsically transcendent of matter, so therefore it doesn't die when the body dies. It's the source of our immortality. So all these ideas about metaphysical anthropology, if we had a better sense of that, it would guide us in the debates about transgenderism and issues like that. But I think we've given up that stuff. We have very reductive views of anthropology today. So it would be very profitable for people to explore, say, a book like Person in the Common Good, where this is kind of laid out by Maritain, or again, some of the chapters of Person and Act where Wojtyła explains this. Where Edith Stein does it in Finite and Eternal Being, to recover this metaphysical anthropology.
And I mean, it's certainly the idea. To me, I think that one of the most wonderful things written is theology of the body, which just even the title is exciting because you just have centuries of theology looking at the soul, the importance of the soul and where's my soul going. And then along comes John Paul II with theology of the body,
right?
And just how important your body is.
Yeah. Exactly.
And of course, as Catholics, we believe in the resurrection of the body. So it's hugely important that, the body, that my body matters, it's
right.
not just incidental to my person.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's integral to personhood. It's not something that is exterior to the person. It's not something that's accidental. We are embodied spirits. And the body has this spousal meaning, which allows us to form a union, the marital union. That's a great idea, an idea that Wojtyła gets from John of the Cross when he studied John of the Cross at the Angelicum along with Aquinas. A lot of the ideas of theology of the body sort of took root there and get expressed later when he writes that great book, Theology of the Body. So yes, he kind of rediscovers in some ways the importance of the body. So does Edith Stein. I think she does the same thing in Finite and Eternal Being. She doesn't write a book like Theology of the Body or talk about spousal meaning or things like that, but she's very, very clear about the importance of the body. I think all these thinkers really modern thought is sort of typified by its dualistic thinking, its dualistic vision. There's a dualism between the body and the soul. If there even is a soul, there's a dualism between, nature and grace. There's a dualism between history and metaphysics. These thinkers overcome all those dualisms. There's a dualism between faith and reason. You have faith on the one hand, or the things you believe in, and then you have reason on the other, and the two never have any connection to each other. That's what modern philosophers think. They think in these dualistic terms, but these philosophers don't think that way at all. They overcome all these dualisms, including this dualism of body and soul, and that I think greatly accounts for their importance because we've gone off the rails with this dualistic thinking.
Very much so.
And they get us back. They get us back on track.
Yeah, it's exciting because if everything is that dualism, it's one or the other. You have to choose one or the other. One of the exciting things is the church has often said, no, we're not going to choose one or the other. We're going to bring these two things together, rationally.
Right.
But we're going to bring them together. And I think you're right. Modern thought just says, you have to pick one or the other.
Right.
And once you're in that mindset, you're so limited. You're so limited, you're either on this track or that track. And so whichever one you've chosen, you've excluded the other track. Which obviously limits your ability to think. To integrate ideas.
Yeah, that's right. And that's why I think I spent some time in the book talking about the nature of Catholic philosophy. So if we're going to talk about Catholic philosophers, what is Catholic philosophy? And I think it overcomes those limitations that you're talking about, and those constraints. Because Catholic philosophy, if you look at what it is, it really is, and a lot of this we get from Fides et Ratio. This is John Paul II's great encyclical on faith and reason. So as he says there, Catholic philosophy is not just about philosophy that doesn't contradict the deposit of the faith, the deposit of fide. It's a philosophy that, first of all, addresses itself to the existential questions that we all deal with, that these philosophers dealt with in their lives. Who am I? Where am I going? Where do I come from? Is there a God? Why is there evil? Is there life after death? All those existential questions that we all think about. Secular philosophy today says, well, philosophy can't answer those questions. They can bring them up, but they don't have any answers to them. Richard Rorty and people like that would say, you can't answer those particular questions. That's beyond the canon of philosophy. But Christian philosophy says, no, we can answer them. And we can answer them through faith and reason. There's no dichotomy there, but so we get some of the answers through faith, but what we get through faith can be substantiated by reason. So maybe faith reveals to us that there is an immortal soul, but we can also use reason to kind of substantiate that, to develop good solid arguments for why there has to be an immortal soul, why human nature, human experience is unintelligible without a soul. So Catholic philosophy relies on faith and reason working together, and it's committed to metaphysics. It's not timid. That's one of the things John Paul II says in Fides et Ratio, is we don't want to be timid about exploring these issues. So, we'll explore the metaphysical. What does all reality have in common? Can we come up with a unified vision of reality, a unified vision of the whole? That's what the metaphysician tries to do, and that's what Catholic philosophy is all about, I think, metaphysics. It's interesting that Karol Wojtyla liked to climb mountains. My teacher, Father Norrie Clark at Fordham, I was very fortunate to study philosophy at Fordham with these great Thomas, Father Norrie Clark and Jerry McCool and so forth. My one connection with von Hildebrand, by the way, is he taught at Fordham, right? When he came to the United States. He was gone when I got there, but people always talked about him and remembered him fondly. But Father Clark said that you can't be a good metaphysician unless you like to climb mountains, right? And he was a big mountain climber. Because when you get up to the top of that mountain, you kind of get this vision of the whole and how things fit together. And it's interesting that a lot of metaphysicians are mountain climbers or love the mountains. That was Wojtyła. He loved the Tatra Mountains. When he came here to Massachusetts, he actually stayed in my town where I was born, Hyde Park, in a parish in Hyde Park. He had a good friend there in a Polish church. And the first thing he wanted to do, he saw the Blue Hills. People in this area might know the Blue Hills, this big hill in Milton. He said, I want to climb that mountain. So think about that. If you really want to be a good metaphysician, you got to be into mountains and get to the top and take a look at the whole, to get a vision of the whole and how things really fit together. So that I think is sort of typical of Catholic philosophy, overcoming these dualisms, has a metaphysical approach. It also, I think, emphasizes epistemological realism. There's in secular philosophy, there are all these doubts about whether we can know anything. It all comes from Kant, the idea that, well, we don't really know an object in itself. We don't know I have this table in front of me. We don't know the table itself. All we know is, my idea of the table. But these thinkers say, no, there's sort of this bridge of action, that knowledge is this self-revelation of being, that these objects really do reveal themselves to us. So we don't have to be skeptical. We don't have to have this kind of relativism. So it overcomes all this relativism, Catholic philosophy. So it's metaphysics, it's epistemological realism, its ability to sort of take apart, disassemble all these dualisms. That's the great thing, I think, about Catholic philosophy.
It's very exciting. In what ways do you think these ideas, these four philosophies and philosophers, are important for the church today?
Yeah, that's a very good question, I think. I think the church, first of all, the church probably needs to rediscover for itself metaphysics. I don't think theology today has sort of become unmoored from metaphysics. And these at least three of the four were very dedicated to metaphysics. So I think these philosophers spoke in the language of being, spoke in the language of nature. So I think that for theology, they really would prompt us to rediscover metaphysics. I also think their moral teachings are very important. There are some in the church who dismissed natural law. There was one of the first synods we had under Pope Francis. there was a famous cardinal who said, well, natural law doesn't mean anything anymore. I won't mention the cardinal's name. And I don't know how many people agreed with him, but I've certainly heard similar comments here and there. But that's crazy, really. I think even von Hildebrand, who doesn't really write so much about natural law in his book on ethics. He writes about values, but I think he appreciated, the natural law was sort of a foundation for all that stuff. So, Karol Wojtyla, Jacques Maritain, they write a lot about natural law, which needs to be rediscovered. The idea that morality is really rooted in human nature, that we all have this fixed human nature. This isn't going to change, that is ordered to certain goods that fulfill us, right? These intrinsic goods that fulfill us, and they're the ground of all morality. And those goods haven't changed, life and health, knowledge, friendship, love of God, the same goods that people were ordered to in, the time of Jesus Christ, the same goods are ordered to today. So we need to put morality back on a solid footing, and get over these ideas that natural law doesn't mean anything anymore. I think it means a great deal.
It seems to me if you lose that foundation, you kind of lost, you've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Without that foundation, if you think that human nature changes or is arbitrary, or it's one way this year and it can be a different way 10 years from now, I don't see how you could ground anything. Like, how could law even be grounded in anything other than human nature?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And many thinkers today say, well, human nature is very fluid. Again, it changes all the time, and it's not fixed at all. But again, I think that's a fundamental mistake. And I don't think they can really point to any ways in which our human nature has really fundamentally changed over the centuries. They talk about the fluidity of human nature, but they really don't back it up. So I think the church needs to rediscover natural law. There are plenty of good Catholic scholars who talk about natural law, but I think the hierarchy in the church, I think they're the ones who need to rediscover it. So they don't make statements like the natural law doesn't mean anything anymore, because it does mean something. We need to rediscover the intelligence of the law, the intelligence of natural law, the intelligence that's embodied in our nature if we just listen to our nature.
It's interesting that three of these philosophers were converts to Catholicism.
Right.
So they didn't start out there. They moved in that direction.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that these thinkers have in common. So I tried in the book to sort of emphasize the commonalities between their lives. And one of the things that they have in common is their conversion. And they all have sort of interesting conversion stories, though I think the most interesting is probably Edith Stein. But one of the things about their conversion is it really was transformative. It really changed everything about them. That's the thing that struck me the most about being a sort of a cradle Catholic. I've never gone through that experience. But Jacques Maritain said that when he became a Catholic, he said, God turned me inside out like a glove. It's like everything changes. He had to reevaluate everything. So it was a very transformative experience. They even had to kind of reinterpret their relationship between faith and philosophy, and reinterpret the way they did philosophy. That's why both Maritain and Edith Stein begin to think as Thomists and begin to kind of incorporate into their thinking the truths of revelation. So for all three, I think it was a very transformative experience. But then there are differences in the way they experienced the conversion. I think Edith Stein's conversion was something that was very immediate and dramatic, right? We all know, most people know that the pathway was sort of primed by a few experiences, particularly her encounters with Max Scheler, a very famous philosopher who was not a very good Catholic, but he believed in the Catholic faith. He saw the wisdom of Catholicism. He had a big impact on Dietrich von Hildebrand, so he played a role in the conversion of von Hildebrand and in Edith Stein.
He was quite a character, I hear.
Yeah, he was quite a character. He wasn't a very loyal husband. He had trouble. He trouble living the faith, but he believed that the faith was the true faith. And he told von Hildebrand, he said, "You should be a Catholic." And von Hildebrand said, "Why?" He said, "Well, the Catholic Church makes saints." But Edith Stein's conversion, so the way was sort of primed by experiences like that, Bernd Kahn with Max Scheler. But it's when she reads the autobiography of Teresa of Avila that she really says, I'm going to be a Catholic. It happens very dramatically. It happens with this great immediacy and this sense of urgency. That's not the way it happens with Maritain and von Hildebrand. They walk to the faith a little bit more slowly. They have more reservations. The Maritains have to get beyond certain prejudices about they once thought that, being Catholic was sort of bourgeois, so they have to kind of get beyond that. They're lucky they have a guide in the great Leon Bloy, who kind of clears the way for them. And they're able to overcome these prejudices and become Catholic. So some cases it's a slow process. In other cases, in the case of Edith Stein, it's very dramatic and very immediate. And in Edith Stein's case, we'd love to know exactly what she read in that autobiography of Teresa of Avila. People speculate, but we don't really know. She doesn't tell us. She doesn't want to tell us. She said it's a secret to me. I'm not telling people what's going on. So she's very reticent about the conversion in some ways, whereas others like von Hildebrand and the Maritains kind of shouted from the rooftops. So they have different experiences about it. And I should mention that both von Hildebrand and Edith Stein sort of paid a professional price for this because there was a prejudice against Catholicism at the time and a prejudice against Catholic philosophy. So Husserl was not very happy that two of his students, von Hildebrand and Edith Stein, had converted. Neither was Heidegger. They said, well, neither one of them really believed in Catholic philosophy, and they thought that these people now would sort of their philosophy would be tainted by these references to Revelation. That's not really true, of course, but so they paid a professional price for their conversions, which was, I think, quite unfortunate.
Well, I think often from the outside looking in, and including at that time and today, when someone hears about, like, say, faith and reason, I think the assumption is that this faith is blind faith.
Yeah.
This isn't an intellectually grounded faith. It's just blind faith.
Right. I think they do see it that way. They see it as these are superstitions or these are beliefs that can't really be proven. So that's why they separate faith and reason. Even people who have faith say, well, they're fideists who say, well, I have faith, but that's it. That's the end of the story. I can't really prove anything. I just believe, and that's the end of it. So the rationalist says, well, faith is a lot of nonsense. It's superstition. It's myth, Well, I'm going to follow reason, and reason is all about science and, what I can see and hear. That's what I'm going to follow. So those are the two extremes you want to avoid, fideism and rationalism. And these people avoid it. They realize that faith and reason are very closely connected. There's a real connection between the two, and that one reinforces the other. And it happens at two levels. I mean, it happens, faith reveals certain truths to us, like the truth about the immortal soul, that then reason can substantiate and reflect upon. So faith doesn't affect the autonomy of philosophy at all. It just reveals things to the philosopher that perhaps he would not begin to think about if it weren't for the faith. And then on another level, faith and reason are connected because of the importance of prayer, the importance of contemplation, the importance of getting graces so that you can discover the truth. So that the good philosopher is the philosopher who prays and who seeks God's help, God's graces in getting the truth. That great phrase that I quote in the book from, again, John Paul II, Veritatis Splendor, his great encyclical, Philosophize in Mary. What a powerful way to think about philosophizing in Mary. And that's sort of what he had in mind, that you should be praying to Mary, use Mary as the guide, that she will, ask her son to give you these graces so that you will discover the truth, that you will stay on the right intellectual path, and that you will be receptive of the truth. That's another, I think, meaning of philosophizing in Mary, that we don't create the truth, right? We don't make it up. We don't create it. We don't fabricate it. We receive it. The truth is there. The truth is God created a universe that's transparent and intelligible, and we can discover that truth, though it takes some effort sometimes. And it takes the kind of graces that Jesus can give us through Mary's intercession.
And then I think dipping, I would say, rationally into phenomenology allows us to look at our own life experience, our own inner life experience, and say, well, does this philosophy, does my faith and my reason, do this philosophy, does it jive with my life experience? Does it make sense with, how I've experienced life? It's a very strange thing if your philosophy doesn't really jive, doesn't match your life experience.
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And in that case, it definitely did, Right. But I think you're right. I think, things are going to be way out of kilter if your life and your philosophy are so discordant, But in their lives, there was a great concordance between the way they lived and the way they philosophized. They were all, I think, models of the intellectual life, really in search of sanctity. That's one thing you could say about all four of them. I think that would be it. Models of the intellectual life in search of sanctity, living out the virtues heroically. I mean, two are canonized saints, but living out the virtues heroically, the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, and the cardinal virtues of justice and temperance, and prudence and courage, particularly courage, because they displayed that courage during World War II. They all lived through World War II, but faced the enemy and the privations and predatory behaviors of the Nazis in World War II with extraordinary courage.
So we have these four beautiful examples. Who was it that said the only the only real tragedy in life is not to be a saint? So we are called to this holiness of life. And so to have role models, to have examples, and like you're saying, of people that had to, it wasn't easy to be a saint. They had to work really hard during a horrible time in history. Your book allows us, like a little window into each of their lives and their philosophies that makes it a little easier as an introduction for the average person to, start to open the door a little and look in there, because they're beautiful examples. They're beautiful examples of holiness for the modern world, which is a tough world.
Right. It is a tough world. Yeah, they are beautiful examples of holiness. Yeah. And that's why I think the book would appeal to anyone who sort of wants some inspiration, because I think that we find it in the lives of these four people. You look at the life of someone like Edith Stein, just an incredible person, incredible to convert from. A lot of people talk about the conversion from Judaism to Catholicism, but it's really from atheism to Catholicism. So that's quite a journey to make. And I think we can all learn from that journey, and learn from the way she lived, and learn from the way that she, just threw herself into the faith and threw herself into prayer, and how much that, really, how the Catholic faith really just so transformed her life. And that can happen to all of us, I think, if we sort of follow her pathway, and a life of contemplative prayer, that can be transformative for us as well.
Absolutely. Do you have a copy of the book there? I don't. I have an electronic copy.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I have a copy here. Sure. People could put it up here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, we have a nice cover with the four pictures of these four thinkers on the cover: Edith Stein and Jacques Maritain, Dietrich von Hildebrand. We've got them on the right side now, and the young Karol Wojtyla, John Paul II. Yeah,
beautiful photographs. Yeah, of all four of them.
Yeah, four philosophers, four Catholic philosophers rejoicing in the truth.
The wonderful book, beautifully written. I highly recommend it. It's just it's an exciting introduction into these four people's lives and their thinking. They're rejoicing in the truth. we have the opportunity to sort of follow those pathways of thought that you lay out very nicely and easily for us in the book.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, all right.
I know we're running out of time. Is there anything that you would like to say that we haven't gotten to that's really important to you concerning the book?
I can't really think of anything. I think we've covered so much. Thanks to you. Thanks to a lot of very good questions. I think we've covered really all the major aspects of their lives. I think maybe we could just end by talking about the fact that I think they do make a very substantial contribution to Catholic philosophy and philosophy in general. Their metaphysics, natural law, realistic epistemology. I think they're definitely worth reading, and they're worth rediscovering today. And my hope is that this book will help that process, that people will begin to pick up some of their works and read them, because I think they'll be pleasantly surprised in what they find.
I think they will, yes.
So that's my hope, that we'll sort of rediscover these great thinkers. As I said before, if anybody's interested in a topic like love, the two greatest books on love in the whole history of philosophy are The Nature of Love by von Hildebrand and Love and Responsibility by Karol Wojtyla. They're both extraordinary treatises. If somebody's looking for a course to teach, it'd be great to teach a course on both of those books. I think
The Heart by von Hildebrand, which is actually a very small volume.
Right, a very small book, but very profound. An excellent book. Yeah, everything he writes is superb. Dietrich von Hildebrand. Yeah,
it really is.
And clear. He's clearer than Wojtyła. But you can understand Wojtyła. With a good teacher, I think people can understand Wojtyła. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the book is available on Amazon and through En route Books.
Yes, that's correct. Yep, that's right. If you go to Amazon, go to En route, you can buy the book there. I think people will be quite pleased, and I think they'll enjoy the book a great deal.
I do too. So again, the title is Four Catholic Philosophers Rejoicing in the Truth.
Yeah.
By Rick Spinello.
Right. Great.
Beautiful. How about you end us with a prayer?
Okay, well, let's end with a prayer to Mary. I thank Mary for helping me during this interview, and I hope it's been instructive for people. So let's give thanks to the Blessed Mother. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be on your show.
Do you have anything else in the works?
No, not really. No, I'm taking a little bit of a break, writing articles, but no new books in the works. Not for now. There'll be something coming, but not quite yet.
All right. Well, get in touch when you get something in the works, and I hope to speak with you again. This has been delightful. Thank you.
Thank you again.
God bless.
Yeah, God bless you too. Thank you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.